Our speaker today is Stacey Klemstein, and you see her subject is up on the screen. Stacey works in a high school library by day. She recommends reads, talking with students, and removing the occasional forgotten cheese stick that was placed as a bookmark. She has published numerous novels across different genres under the pen names of Stacey Kade and S.A. Barnes, in relation to Noble. She lives in Illinois with more dogs and books than is advisable, and a very patient husband. So with that, let's give a Tuesday Club welcome to Stacey Klemstein.
Before I start, I want to say thank you for having me. I appreciate it. And what a beautiful facility you have here. I've never been here before. I'm from the far north suburbs, just across the border from Wisconsin. So this is all new to me, but it's really, I was very tempted to go in and take a peek at your library just to see what's in there. You will find that I am a very informal speaker. I'm used to speaking to high school students. I am a loud speaker even without the microphone, but I also talk really quickly. My dad is a Lutheran pastor, and for most of my life has been encouraging me to slow down, Stace, because no one understands me. And when I get him on the phone, he can't even, like, sometimes I'm talking so fast, especially if I'm excited or nervous, which I still am standing up in front of groups of people, that he can't even tell if it's me or my sister or what I'm trying to tell him. So if I'm speaking too quickly or if you miss something, please just shout out and say, hey, say that again, or raise your hand, because again, very informal speaker. And my goal here today is to share my journey and my experiences. I created this talk because I wanted to share with high school students or people in general with things that I wish I had known earlier. You guys may all have this mastered, but I am still trying to work this out. So I want to keep you entertained. I hope you get something from it, and hopefully I keep you awake in a good way. So the way that I structure this talk, I do use notes, because if not, we'll end up talking about Star Wars for 45 minutes because I fall down rabbit holes very easily. I'm going to structure this. We're going to talk a little bit about me and my writing and publishing journey. And then the meat of it is the things that I wish I had known, specifically about pursuing a dream that's difficult, which publishing often is. I will also share, if there's interest, a few writing techniques that I've learned for those of you who are interested in writing. And if there's time, we'll do I brought my latest book, which is Dead Silence. It is science fiction horror, and I will read you a part that is not super scary if there's time, and if we have time, a Q&A also. So does that sound good? Yes. Okay, good. And I love you guys. Yeah, you say yes and you nod your heads. Much better than high school students. Okay. They're usually like, we have to be here. All right, so really quick, let me run you through. I always feel like it's important to sort of give you the background and why you might want to listen to me, because who am I? So I published as Stacey Klemstein is my real name. Stacey Kade is one of my pen names. It was the first one. I published the Ghost and the Goth series with Disney-Hyperion in 2010, 11, and 12. Then also with Disney-Hyperion, although these are the republished copies with new covers that I put out myself when I got the rights back in 2013, 14, and 15. That is the Project Paper Doll series, which is science fiction set in high school. It's young adult. These are two of my standalone young adult novels, For This Life Only, which is about being a pastor's kid. That felt I had some experience on that I could share, and Finding Felicity, which is about a girl who's incredibly nervous about going to college and retreats sort of to a world of fantasy in her favorite television show, which happens to be the 90s show Felicity, if anybody remembers that one. J.J. Abrams before he was known for Star Wars. These are my two adult romance novels. They are steamy, I will warn you. If you like them, awesome. 738 Days and Starlight Nights. They are about these actors who sort of fall in love while they're working. And then this is my latest one. Oh, yes, absolutely. That's me being nervous. I will try. So this is my latest book. This is Dead Silence. It was published by Tor Nightfire in 2022. And the basic gist of it is, the way that I explain it in a second or less, it's The Shining. It's set in space, basically. It's a haunted hotel, essentially, in space. It's a cruise ship. So this basic story is 20 years ago, there was a luxury space liner, think the Titanic, but in space. It vanished on its maiden voyage, never heard from again. Now, 20 some years later, I have a team of people who are out there. One of my friends who writes science fiction calls it my Xfinity cable guy story, because these people are out fixing the beacons in space that allow us to communicate with ships. And they pick up a really old, strange sounding distress signal. We should go find out what that is, right? Probably a bad idea, but it's a book, so we're going to go do that. They go, and guess what? They find the Aurora, the ship that's been missing for 20 years. It seems perfectly whole. There's nothing wrong with it. No hole blown in the side of it. It's just there, floating. They decide, as you know, which is based on maritime salvage, which I stole for my own purposes, you can claim a wreck. You can claim an abandoned wreck. And usually the insurance company will give you a percentage of the ship's worth or the insured value of that ship. So that's what I used for the basis of this. They're going to go on the ship and try to claim it. And in doing so, they'll make a lot of money. And they're desperate for money because this is their last day on the job. This team is going to be laid off and replaced by technology. They're going to be replaced by ships that can come out and do the repairs that they do now. So they go on board. Unfortunately, it becomes very clear very quickly that bad things happened on this ship. And now they're not so sure they're going to be able to get off the ship. So that is the general premise for Dead Silence. And it came out in February. I have been very fortunate. It was a Goodreads Choice Awards finalist. It was an Amazon Editor's Choice, which was fantastic for fantasy and science fiction. It was named the best book of 2022 by the New York Public Library, which was really cool. So we got a couple starred reviews. So that is my latest book. That was under S.A. Barnes, which is sort of my reinvention of myself, from Stacey Klemstein to Stacey Kade to S.A. Barnes. And I can talk about that a little bit too, because as much as that was growth, there was also a lot of failure involved in those transitions. But I wanted to at least give you that sort of my credentials up front, so you know why maybe you'd want to listen to what I have to say. So I graduated from Valparaiso University with a degree in English. Anybody know Valpo? Yeah, okay. Sometimes, depending on where I am, everyone kind of looks at me blankly and goes, it sounds kind of familiar. So I graduated with a degree in English. I did not know that I wanted to be a writer. I didn't know. I just knew that English was literally the only thing I was good at, only thing I could do. Math, I'm hopeless at. So graduated with my English degree. I knew I didn't want to teach, which ironically, of course, now I work in a high school, and having a teaching degree would be way more useful, but I do not have one. So I went to work for Caterpillar. Anybody know Caterpillar downstate? There's some up here now, actually. I think they're based up here. Yes, Peoria. So my parents lived in Peoria, and I graduated and got a job in the marketing communications area of the Caterpillar home office in Peoria. And I had in my head that this was going to be my future, that I was going to be in there making these really cool brochures and designing these really cool websites and doing all the communication things. What I found out very quickly was that it helps to be enthusiastic about this if you actually like or use the products. And I did not really have a lot of experience with earth moving equipment. And the one experience I did have, which I always love telling the kids this story because they look at me with these big eyes. They took all of us out, all the marketing writers, out to the testing grounds or the proving grounds, which is where they test the equipment, or, you know, kind of give people a tour of what these big, huge machines can do. One of them had wheels so big that I could stand in the wheel and reach out my arms and wouldn't touch. It was huge. So they had us get into these machines, and you had like hard hats and your safety glasses, and you could dig a hole. Don't ask me what any of these machines are called. I don't remember anymore. So I got in one. I was waited in line, and the whole idea is to get you to know the machines better so you can write about it, right? I got in there. I started digging the hole very cautiously. I'm an anxious person to begin with. And at that point, I felt there's the stabilizing legs on this machine. And if you dig too big of a hole, the stabilizing things start to tip. Yeah, I got out of there super fast. That was the last thing I wanted, was to tip over this thousands and thousands of dollars equipment into a hole that I dug. So I decided that was maybe not exactly what I needed to be focused on for my career. I was not probably the ideal candidate for that. So one of the things that I loved about working there, though, was that they had a great personal development or professional development program. So they would have classes in-house for you to come and learn about things. I remember we took it. Anybody remember the Franklin planner, the Franklin Covey planners that they had? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So they taught us that stuff, and they brought all these people, these speakers in. They had one come in, and I was changed by this man's presentation. And I'm going to tell you the gist of what he said. Basically, I was 22 years old-ish, 20, maybe 23 at the time. And he had us sit down and write, I think it was 5 or 10 things that we wanted to accomplish in the next 20 years. Oh, okay. So I started, I want to be a college professor. I want to go to Europe. I want to get married. I want to do all of these things, right? Write a book was on there, because books have been my savior my whole life. My dad, as I mentioned, is a pastor. We moved every 3 or 4 years my whole life. The only time somebody ever beats me in that record is a military brat, usually. I see you nodding, yes. And it's really hard. It's hard probably for anybody, but when you're an anxious, introverted, bookish child, it's not good. So I relied on books, on stories to fit in, right? So in fact, the story that I like to tell that makes my parents cringe, so please don't tell them, is, I was the storyteller. I am still a storyteller. A lot of people who don't even write books are storytellers. You have somebody in your friend circle probably that you look to go, oh, hey, tell the story about the time we met that guy with the hand, and then they'll know exactly what you're talking about, and they will tell that story. I was that person. When we moved, I learned every time we moved that, we were moving far enough away that the people from town A didn't know the people from town B. So I could say whatever I wanted about what happened in town A, therefore impressing the people in town B and having fun at the same time, making friends. I wanted a place to sit at lunch is really what it amounted to. I have to tell you, the kids in high school, I think, are a lot nicer today. They deal with different things, but I was, in school in the 80s and 90s, and it's rough. So when we moved to this town, Hillsboro, Illinois. Does anybody know Hillsboro? It's way down south. And my dad was a pastor. It's 4,000 people, 3,000, very small town. Had never lived in a small town that small before. I learned very quickly what that's like. And my parents were off with members of the church, and I was sent off with a girl who was from the church. Her name was Missy, and we were going to the little town festival, right? And she asked me very normally, of course, would you like a cup of lemonade from the stand? It was, like one of the festivals that little towns have. And I was like, oh, no. And then I realized this is my opportunity. I can't just say I don't like lemonade because it's sour. No, I have to make up a story. So I say, I don't drink lemonade anymore since this woman tried to poison my brother at the state fair with arsenic. I mean, I was in. I was not, this is not a small lie. This is a huge lie, right? She was adequately impressed. I had a friend, someone to sit with. Of course, here's where the small town thing kicks in. I'm a little kid who's a liar. I'm also a little kid who's a liar who's the pastor's kid, the new pastor's kid in a really small town. It does not take long for this to backfire on you, right? But I learned in that moment that not only did I love books, and books were the things that kept me company when no one else was around or no one else wanted to be around, but I had the capacity to tell the stories to make people react the way that I wanted them to react, right? Very powerful. So when I sat down back at Caterpillar and made that list, write a book was on my list of things that I wanted to do in 20 years. I'm switching gears on you guys back. Sorry, because I went down my little rabbit hole. And when we made our list, we finished, he said, all right, now that you've got your list, this gentleman who was teaching, he said, I want you to tell me how much time are you spending on each one of those things every day? None. Is none an answer? Because his point was, which he explained, is that most of the big things we want to accomplish in life, whether it's writing a book, going to Europe, whatever, are not things you can do on a dime. You have to plan them. You have to save money. You have to think about them. If there is a person who can write a book overnight, I hope I never meet them, because my jealousy will probably drive me to madness. It would not be good. it was sort of a light bulb moment for me to realize that anything that I wanted, I needed to actually put effort and time into now. Our temptation, just as people, if we want something, is to go, yes, I definitely am going to do that. I'm definitely going to do that tomorrow, when I don't have to go to the post office, when I don't have to go to the grocery store, when I don't have to do these other things. I'll have more time tomorrow. You never have more time. There's always more stuff to do. So I learned from this that basically, if there was something I wanted, I needed to put that time in starting now, and I needed to block that off. I needed to make sure I was actually, Brett Favre, I think, has this idea. I'm not a sports person, like at all, but my husband is a big Packers fan, and I had read a quote from him that I really liked, which was, anything you're trying to accomplish, a touchdown is moving the chains 10 yards at a time, right? You're just moving the chains. If you're saving up money, you're putting your handful of change in the jar every night. I needed to start putting change in the jar. I needed to start moving those chains 10 yards at a time, which I think is a down, but I'm not really sure. Anyway, so that's what I did. I decided I was going to write a book. And I did. I wrote it. It took me 2 years to write it. It was 500 pages, 5 points of view, which is generally, like, if you're a very skilled writer, you can probably pull that off. I was not. I was a newbie. I had no idea what I was doing. I had no idea how long chapters should be. 5 main characters, 5 point of view main characters is insane for somebody who is just starting out. You don't know how to manage. I didn't know how to manage that many people, but I did it. I finished it. And my grandmother, who passed away a couple years ago, a very small German lady, not prone to couching anything, said to me when she read it, she was one of the only people I let read it, said, well, it's not the worst thing I ever read. And you know what's funny? Because I knew her, I knew she would tell me if it was. So that actually functioned as encouragement, which is what she meant. So the thing what's interesting about that is I kind of got addicted. I learned that this was fun. This was reading, but amplified. This was, I don't have to go into the world and wonder what's going to happen next. I get to make those decisions, which is both a double-edged sword, let me tell you, because when you don't know what happens next, you're like, I wonder what happens next. Oh, that's me. I have to figure out what happens next. So I wrote another book. Took me less time. I think I wrote the first draft in maybe 3 months. And then I got stuck for about 18 months in the middle because I couldn't figure out what was wrong. The tension went away as what was wrong, but I didn't know that because I was writing based on instinct. I was writing from having read thousands of books over the years, and I didn't know what was wrong because I didn't understand story structure. So at that point, I turned to teaching myself through classes, through reading other people's books and analyzing and trying to understand. And one of the reasons I bring this up is because we, as readers or people who consume art of any kind, we only look at the finished product. Most of the time, we're not looking at the drafts. We're not looking at, Stephen King has the famous story of how many people are familiar with his book, Carrie, or the movie even? Okay, so the way that started, he wrote, I think the first maybe 3 pages, crumpled it up and threw it in his garbage can because he was so disgusted with himself and he hated it. His wife is the one that fished it out, brushed off the cigarette ashes, because he was a smoker at the time, and said, this is something, you need to finish it. We don't always hear those stories. Art we see as the final product. So when I go and I talk to people, I always mention, I got stuck. I had to learn more. When you start creating, there's a gap between what you choose to consume, the level at what you choose to consume, and what you produce, right? And a lot of times that gap dissuades people from trying it. I drew a picture. It doesn't look like Picasso, or maybe it does, but not in a good way. I'm not going to do this anymore because I'm not good enough. That gap exists, but you can close it. You can close it. That's part of the journey. I'm still on that journey of closing the gap between what I like to consume as a consumer of art and what I like to produce or what I can produce. So learning continually is hugely important. And I bring that up. You guys probably already know that. You're here taking classes and listening to things. Kids in high school are just champing at the bit to get out. I don't ever want to go to school again, especially out by where I work. A lot of kids are not going on to college necessarily. They may go on to trade programs or other things, but they're not necessarily going to go to school. I'm like, that's fine, but remember to learn. I don't care if you're learning in a formal environment. Take a knitting class, come to a center like this. Public libraries offer amazing programs. Keep learning, because that's what keeps that enthusiasm there. So that was my side note, is that I kind of had to teach myself how to do that. My first book was published when I was 29 years old. It was published with a small press, not any of these. It's not even up there. I tell the kids, when my book was published, it was published by a very small, like I was literally their first book and their only book for a long time, a very small company, and ebook was an option. The way that you got an ebook was that you ordered it on the computer, and then we sent you a floppy disk with the manuscript formatted on it. That's how long ago this was and how small that company was. But it was okay. I was excited. I had published a book. I was done, right? That marked the thing off my list. Well, no, because one, I was addicted, as I mentioned, but two, well, Barnes and Noble's not carrying it. Neither is Borders, when Borders existed. I wanted to walk into a bookstore and see my book on the shelf. That was not going to happen with a floppy disk. That was just not going to work, right? So I went back, did more research, learned more stuff, tried to figure out what I needed to do. Because in publishing, you sort of have a divide, and it's a little different these days than it was 20 some years ago when I was doing this at the beginning. But you have basically what is now the big five publishers: Penguin, Random House, Macmillan, HarperCollins. I'm trying to think of Simon and Schuster, and I'm missing one. I can't think of it right now. But those are all the big five publishers. And then they have dozens of tiny imprints underneath of them. So basically, almost any book that you're buying in a bookstore is from one of those big five, right? There are some smaller publishers now that are gaining ground. You have the whole indie movement, which is people who are publishing their own books through Amazon or various other resources that allow you to do that. So, but to get into the bookstore, to have that, I needed to be published by a big five publisher, right? And to do that, you have to be represented by an agent. I didn't have an agent, and I had tried to get an agent, and that was my first taste of a lot of rejection, lots of rejection. 40 some people rejected me, at least. And, you know, the funny thing was I was very scared of that. Because I think I felt like I was going to get a letter that said, why are you bothering? Like, just stop, save us all the trouble and yourself the stamp, because at the time it wasn't email, and just quit. But that's not what happens. They send you a very nice photocopied, somewhat sideways email that says, dear author, or a letter that says, dear author, thank you so much for your interest. You know, we don't think we're the right fit for this book. It's nothing personal at all, which is sometimes even worse. So it took me about 4 more manuscripts and 5 more years of writing. And I totally changed what I was writing. When I was writing initially, I was writing science fiction romance. And that's a really, really niche genre, which is why I'm laughing, because there's maybe one person in here who's read something that fits into that category. I switched over to young adult. Young adult was booming at that time. How many people have heard of Twilight and Stephanie Meyer? Yeah, so that was right at the moment when this was taking off. And I had emailed an agent that someone else had recommended to me. So I had sort of an in and said, oh, I had this sci-fi romance series. I really am interested. I think that, you know, it could, blah, blah, blah. And I said, oh, and by the way, I have this YA idea, which, by the way, I had not finished. One of the big rules in publishing is don't query an agent unless you have a finished manuscript. I was like, she's never going to pick this. She'll pick the other thing. I'll just put it in there to make it seem like I'm well-rounded. Yeah, she picked that thing. And then I had to panic and say, oh, well, I'm working on another project. It'll be done in about a month. And then I had to scramble and write like an insane person to get it done. But it happened. That was The Ghost and the Goth, which is that tiny one up there. It was, I got an agent, I think, in 2008. So if you're keeping track, let's see, and then I got published in 2010. It took 2 years for them to work through the publishing process. So it was 5 years. I think I was 29 with the first one and 34, 35 when I got picked up by an agent, Disney bought the book, sent me on tour, the only tour I have yet to be on, by the way. And my book was on shelves. My book was in Barnes and Noble, and it was amazing. And I will tell you that, let me sidestep a little bit first, because one of the things that was important when I was still struggling with all those rejections, I'm stubborn. I am very much like my German grandmother. I'm not going to give up. Persistence is key. Persistence is what makes the difference. My parents also hate me telling this story, but when I first told them I wanted to write and get published by a big publisher, be in the stores, they very kindly looked at me and said, "Are you sure you want to do that? Like, there's a lot of rejection involved trying to do that. Like, that's just a lot of pain." And I was like, "No, I really want to do it." And they're like, "But the odds are against, like there's like something like 100,000 books, I think, are published every year or something. I know, but there's just thousands and thousands of more manuscripts that just sit in stacks in agents and editors' offices, and you're competing against all of those. Are you sure you want to do that?" So then I would revert to my favorite quote, which is, "Never tell me the odds. Never tell me the odds." Anybody know what that movie's from? What movie that's from? No, yeah, you do. Star Wars, it's Empire Strikes Back. It's Han Solo saying, because C-3PO is trying to talk him out of going into the asteroid field. He's like, "Sir, the odds of surviving this are 3,700 to 1. And he says, "Never tell me the odds," because Harrison Ford is awesome. The other thing that I learned at that point was there's this great guy named Stephen Pressfield, and he has a book called Do the Work. And he has this quote that I refer to all the time: "Ignorance and arrogance are the artist and entrepreneur's indispensable allies. She must be clueless enough to have no idea how difficult her enterprise is going to be, and cocky enough to believe she can pull it off anyway." So then in summary, yeah, by the time my book was acquired by Disney, I'd written 4 other books, lots of partials, and been rejected close to 50 times. So I'm in the door, right? I got this series published with Disney. I got another series published with Disney. I'm good, right? Everything's good. Straight up from here, right? Yeah, no. What's funny is I had done the research. I knew that was not always how it worked, that success is frequently up, down, sideways, backwards, up, this way, all over the place, right? It's not just a straight up shot. It doesn't work like that. I knew that. And yet somehow in the back of my brain, I guess I must have thought, I will be different. I will be the one. Yeah, no. So you can see I started to jump around a little bit because I had my first 2 series with Disney. Then my editor, my beloved editor, who had plucked me from the slush pile, switched publishing houses. He left. He went to Simon & Schuster. And I thought, well, I'll just go with you. And the problem was I could do that in that case because I didn't have an existing contract with Disney. I had satisfied the contract with them. The problem was that paranormal romance, or what I was writing, which had paranormal sci-fi elements, was slowly starting to decline. They didn't want stories like that anymore. Those weren't selling. The market had been glutted. Twilight had done its job, right? So now it was John Green, Fault in Our Stars, that kind of stuff is what they wanted. So I tried. I really tried. I wrote a book for This Life Only. I wrote a book, Finding Felicity, both contemporary, young adult, very little romance, absolutely no paranormal. It was probably some of the worst experiences in my life trying to fit myself into a cookie cutter that was not meant for me. So I failed. I failed big time. At the same time that was going on, I was writing romance, which still, these 2 books, 738 Days and Starlight Nights, are 2 of my best reviewed books. I got starred reviews from Publishers Weekly on both of them, which is a big deal in the industry. Nobody here cares. Nobody anywhere cares except other writers. And they failed. They flopped. They sold basically nothing. They're still out there. You can still get them. But the company that I was working with was actually another division of the current company I'm working with. They were like, "Yeah, we're done. Thank you. We're done." So now what am I going to do? I had been a full-time writer at that point. I quit my job when Ghost in the Goth came out. I had 6 books out. I hadn't been writing copywriting in almost a decade. What was I supposed to do? I didn't know. It was really hard, you guys. That is still something I struggle with because that was probably a moment when I was really questioning whether I had misunderstood what was supposed to be a calling. Yeah.
You get proofreading so that you're still in the game?
That's a great question.
Repeat the question.
Sure. Did I at that time get proofreading or copy editing jobs for other authors at that time? I actually did do that. The problem with that is you have to either be in a flow where people know to send that to you, or you have to be willing to spend a lot of time going out and finding those jobs. And even then, you're not earning the same level of money. I was very fortunate that I had a couple friends who were able to shunt a couple jobs my way, which helped. I took a part-time job working at Barnes & Noble, which I will never, ever regret, because I learned so much about the other side of publishing, things I didn't know. But my publishing career, it seemed very much at that moment that was going to be over, because I couldn't figure out what I was doing. My agent, who is wonderful, I had written the first 80 pages of this book, which is a far cry from YA and romance. People get stabbed in the eyeball, folks. It's very, very far from romance and YA. And she's like, I don't know what you want me to do with this. This is not the brand that you have. I ended up getting transferred to a different agent, and that was also a thing that felt like a failure. I wasn't able. Agents make money when you make money. So if you're not making money, they're not making money. They're not going to want to hang on to you or put time into you, because that's not worth their effort at that point. So transferred to another agent. I said, I know we have all these other ideas, these other YA ideas that everybody wants me to do, because that's where I'm branded. That's where people know me. But I really want to try this one. Will you please look at it? So she read it. And of course, I'm on pins and needles waiting. And she gets back to me and she says, all right, two things. You're going to have to finish the manuscript, because you are completely unknown in this genre. When you are a writer, when I was writing YA, if I had an idea, I could call up my editor and say, hey, I have this idea. I'll write you 3 chapters and a synopsis. And he'd go, great. They'd take it through the process. I would get the first check, right? You get through a check at various times. You get a check on signing on contract, a check when the manuscript is approved, and a check when the book comes out, right? So that's how I was able to stay afloat for all those years. I would pitch a manuscript, not a complete one, just a partial. They would approve it. I'd write it. We keep going through the circle. Well, all of a sudden, when that cycle hits a hard stop, there's no mortgage payment. You're in trouble, right? So she said to me, you need to write the whole book, which is called writing on spec, because you're writing on speculation that someone is going to buy it. And it takes me 6 months at least to write a book. So that would be me committing to that idea. Which is the other thing you need to know is this is not science fiction. This is horror. And you need to know that going into it, because it's going to be pitched differently. Okay, so I did it. I wrote the book, sent it. They sent it out. We didn't hear anything. We didn't hear anything. We didn't hear anything. And then this is like the weird little kismet thing that happened. My sister, who's much younger than I am, my sister is 13 years younger. She's also a book person. She does not like to write, does not want to write, but she loves to edit. And I had been giving her my things to read and give me thoughts on since she was very young, because she was my target audience, right? She was young adult. So she grew up, graduated, went to New York and became an editor. And then she left that job and came back to work here because she wanted to be closer to family. She was getting married. And so in process, she was inviting people from New York, her closest friends, to come. And so I said to her, I said, hey, your former boss is coming. And I said, normally, and I knew that person because I had met them at conferences as a writer back in the day, right? So I said, do you think I should mention that I have this book that's on sub to her company? She said, yes, you should mention it. If it comes up, you should mention it. So I did it. I did my little pitch, kind of like I did with you guys at the beginning. And she goes, sounds great. Make sure, who's got it again? And I told her who the editor was. Like 3 days later, I had a call saying they were reading it and everything was, so I don't know that made a big difference, but I sure think it didn't hurt. It was one of those things where you're like, okay, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna make myself face the possibility of someone I respect kind of giving me that, oh, that's so interesting look, where you want to run away and hide under the champagne table. Yeah. But I did it. And it actually ended up working out, this book. And then I ended up getting, it hasn't been announced yet, but I have a 2-book contract with them for 2 more in this same genre. But what happens next? I have no idea. Rejection is still very, very much part of my profession. It's part of the industry. What I ended up doing while I was waiting for this to sell, I went and got a job working in a library at a local high school, and it has been fantastic. What I thought was probably the darkest, most difficult moment of my life was both dark and difficult, but I don't regret it for a moment because it landed me in a position to reach out to kids who are just learning the love of reading, and I can kind of push books on them. Here, try this one. Ooh, this one's really good. I love that. And it actually has made my writing better. And I think I'm a better person for it, which is wonderful. So even though rejection and failure have gotten me here, in a lot of ways, it actually was a success. I just didn't know that because I was looking at the wrong things. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. So here we're getting to the part, the things that I wish that I had known. And these are just, fear doesn't necessarily mean something's a bad idea. It's meant to protect you, especially for people when I talk to teenagers who are still developing their prefrontal cortex. I don't want you to go skateboarding off the edge of a building, but it is a protective mechanism. And sometimes it's trying to protect you from hurt that you actually need to feel to grow, or a chance that you really do need to take. Excited fear is the one you want to pursue, the one where you're excited about doing something. The one you're like, I'm not sure I should touch this hot stove. We're going to leave that one alone. The problem is that it's a lot easier to let something exist, an idea, a book, or whatever, in your head until you actually have to take action on it. That's when fear really kicks in. The idea was great until I started writing it, and now I suck. Like, this idea deserves a much better writer. I'm not sure why it came to me, right? That kind of thing. Fear is trying to protect you in a way, but it also really gets in your way. Liz Gilbert, who wrote Eat, Pray, Love, you guys know her. So she talks about that any form of procrastination is fear. Anything you're putting off is fear, for one thing or one reason or another. And she has this great quote that I love. She says, "My fear and creativity are basically conjoined twins, as evidenced by the fact that creativity cannot take a single step forward without fear marching right alongside it." And she says that there's something she writes to fear when she's struggling. She says, "Dearest fear, creativity and I are about to go on a road trip together. I understand you'll be joining us because you always do. I acknowledge that you have an important job to do in my life and that you take your job seriously." And then she goes on to say, basically, "But I'll be at the wheel, you'll be in the back," and hands off the radio. Fear is okay. You're never going to feel fearless. My dad got me a quote when I was really struggling with this, is that basically courage is feeling the fear and saddling up anyway. John Wayne. Failure is the other thing that I changed how I look at failure. I am one of those type A overachievers. You probably could tell that. I don't like to fail at things. Failing at things makes me feel bad. The problem is you learn so much more from failing. You do. You learn so much more from failing than success. I've always said, because my dad likes to tease me about being the next J.K. Rowling, and wouldn't that have been great if that happened right out the door? And I said, there are many problems with that statement, but the one that would have been right away is, if I had done that, if that had happened to me right out the door, I wouldn't have any idea what I was doing. It would have been a fluke. I would have stumbled into learning how to write a book, but I wouldn't have any idea how to do the next one because I didn't have the knowledge. I didn't have the skill or the craft to back it up. So failure taught me a lot. The first quiz that I got in college, I got a D because I didn't understand how college was different from high school. I just didn't get it. I thought, that's it. I'm done. They're going to tell me to pack up my bags and go because I'm not, this is my best effort. I had to fail to learn how to do it differently. And I wish that we had a better way of teaching, especially young people, about failure, because I'm sure there are experiences in your own lives where you have experienced failure and learned something from it, gotten better, had your whole life trajectory change because of failure, but not in a bad way. The kids these days are very much afraid of failure in the same way that I was. And I wish we could teach that in a different way. There was an article that I read where a woman who is the daughter of a famous entrepreneur, don't ask me his name because I can't remember. And basically she said whenever their father would gather them for dinner every week, he would say, what did you fail at this week? What did you try and fail at this week? Because he really wanted to know. Now, maybe you're going to try at soccer and fail. That's fine. If you still like it, you might try it again. But without the pressure to be perfect on the first try, you're more open to other ideas. I wish that I had known that. I wish that I had tried out for plays in high school, but I didn't because I was afraid I would suck. I wish that I had actually stayed around for the extra practice in show choir auditions, and maybe I would have actually gotten the dance. Probably not because I have 2 left feet and no coordination, but I could have tried. So I learned all this because I entered a field where failure is an enormous part of the process. And I wish that I had known it going into it. And now I'm starting to learn, as I said at the beginning of this, I'm still trying to learn all this. I'm still trying to learn how to not be afraid to try something new. I'm still, whether it's a different idea for a book, whether it's pushing back against an expert who's telling me you need to do it this way. I'm still trying to learn which fear I'm listening to. I'm still trying to get comfortable with the idea of failure teaching me something. So those are the things that I wish that I had known earlier. Now, I do have stuff about writing. If people want to hear more about the process, I can talk to you about my process, but that also might be something that's not as interesting to as many people, I recognize. We have plenty of time for a question and answer. I can do a reading. I'm kind of leaving it up to you, whatever you guys feel you're most interested in. I'd love to hear the process. Okay, sure. Yeah. So one of the things, I told you I was an English major, right? Because it was the only thing I was good at. And that is true. The problem was what got me an A in college or even in high school is a totally different type of writing. I was very, very out of my element. So my process typically is I get an idea. Sometimes I get a situation, is what Stephen King calls it. You know, a family trapped in a hotel over winter, and the father is an alcoholic and losing his mind, and the kid is maybe seeing ghosts. That's a situation. Sometimes I get a person. What would it be like to be a serial killer's daughter? Do you worry about whether that tendency is genetic? Do you worry about what you might do if, say, you're a sleepwalker and you're a serial killer's daughter? Stay tuned for more on that from me. So I have to have the idea, the gist. I also have to be really excited about it. The thing that I have learned the hard way is that I need to not just be excited about one or the other, but I have to find both. I have to find a situation that I'm like, ooh, I would read this book. That's always my first level. Would I read this book? If someone else wrote it, would I read it? And the other thing is I have to find a person in that situation, or a person like I was describing who has a history that I'm fascinated by, that I can care about. If I don't have those two things, the idea doesn't have legs. So I spend a lot of time jotting down notes in a notebook, an old school pen and paper notebook, because I don't know where all these things are going to go. So once I finally found something that I think I'm going to work on, then I write all kinds of notes. I write down everything I can think of, especially when I'm dealing with science fiction. I'm world building. So if we're set in the future, how far in the future? Is this a future that has warp drive, or is this something where we're stuck in our solar system? Why are we stuck in our solar system? Do we have people living on Mars? Where are all these things happening? Why does it matter? Because one of the things that you have to figure out, I learned this from a book called Memo on the Story Department, which is Memo from the Story Department, which is there have to be specific reasons why you do this. I can't set a book in 2017 without a reason for it being 2017. Right? If I'm setting it deliberately in a time, there needs to be a reason for that. Actually, it's really interesting lately talking to writers because they've had to make some tough choices. Do we mention the pandemic? Do we not? If I set it in 2019, is it coming? If I set it in 2020, which is smack in the middle of it, do I have to acknowledge it? So all that stuff is stuff I'm working out. I literally take just hundreds and hundreds of notes. Then I do something, and hopefully I won't offend anybody with a strong language, one little piece of strong language. Anne Lamott has a book called Bird by Bird, right? And it's a book about writing advice, and there are several chapters in there that have always spoken to me, and one of them is called Write a Shitty First Draft. And it is the best thing that ever happened to me, a recovering perfectionist. Because here's the thing, when you care about something, you want to do your absolute best, right? You lock down on it. I'm going to get this. I'm going to get it right. And then nothing is ever good enough. You write the same sentence or paragraph or chapter over and over and over again, and you never make any progress. So her theory is you write this shitty first draft, you get it all the way done, you get out of your own way. I literally write at the top, this is the first draft. Because then I am out of my own way. I know it's going to be imperfect. I'm going to have to fix it. That's okay. And you get stuff that you wouldn't have found if you were locked down so tight. If you let yourself experiment, you're going to get more out of it. And I think that's true for any form of art, whether you're painting or creating a song. Make a mess of it. That's what I always tell the kids in creative writing. Make a mess of it. You can clean it up later. So I try not to freak out about it. Write that first draft. Then I try to give myself some time away from it to think about. Usually what I actually do is follow Stephen King's advice, which is work on something else. Because nothing is more exciting than a new idea that you haven't been slaving over for the last 6 months that you hate, kind of, because you can see all the imperfections. I'm going to go over here and this one will be the perfect one. I'm going to work on this one for a while. So you got to trick yourself that way. I go back to it and then I look at it, trying to read it with fresh eyes. And I want to make sure of two things. I want to make sure my story question is answered. And I want to make sure that my character grows. Lisa Cron, who is a writer, has a book called Wired for Story, right? And she basically has this theory that human beings, that story continues to exist in various formats because human beings learn vicariously. In the old days, it was don't walk past that cave that smells kind of funny because Bill and Bob walked by there and nobody's seen them since in the caveman days, you know? It was that kind of thing, right? These days, it's different. We're learning more about growing past hurts. We're learning about how to deal with disappointments. It's more of a psychological growth than, you know, an actual like physical danger thing. But there are plenty of people who listen to true crime, I think, for the same reason, because now they know to lock their doors and they know to not park next to a van in a parking lot, right? So we are learning. We learn from story. So what I want my character to do is to demonstrate growth, in the sense that they can't do something, they're stuck with something from their past, usually at the beginning, that the course of this story is going to force them to deal with. And that's one of the things that I personally still struggle with, is sometimes I have that situation, right? Oh, that would be so cool. We're going to do this. But then I've got to make sure that whatever this person's problem is actually going to be solved or forced to be in this situation. If I have somebody who is afraid of heights and I'm going to stick them in a submarine, they don't have a problem. Right? So I've got to make sure that my person who's afraid of water is in the submarine. That's what I'm kind of working on. So I kind of think about all that stuff. And there's a lot of different techniques to do that. There's a great technique that I'll actually teach you this right now really quick. It's called goal, motivation, and conflict. It was created by Deborah Dixon. She's a romance writer, and it applies regardless of genre. What's a movie that you think relatively recently that everyone has kind of seen? Has everybody seen Star Wars? Mostly the originals, the best ones. So let's talk about that. So who's our main character in New Hope, the first one that came out? Somebody shout it out. Luke Skywalker, yes. Okay. And what, for the bulk of the movie, this is kind of tricky. For the bulk of the movie, what is Luke trying to accomplish? He doesn't know that his father's still alive, so it's not that. He wants to join the rebellion and they want to defeat the Empire. He wants to fight the Empire, right? Well, he has a lot of conflict on this. What is the conflict in this? Why can't he do that? What's standing in his way? His uncle doesn't want him to leave the planet. He's kind of gets sucked into the Death Star without any resources whatsoever, almost gets killed in a garbage compact place. And then when he finally gets out, they have this impossible mission of shooting something that's only like 3 meters across, right? There's all kinds of conflict. And from the internal side, where do we see Luke? What's the big thing that we see Luke growing with? How do we see him growing? He does definitely have opposition to Han Solo, and Han is a great foil for him because he has made opposite choices. Luke is all for the good of other people. Han is what's in it for me, right? A blaster versus a lightsaber. He finds a mentor. Yes. So we actually are dealing with a lot of the hero's journey aspects here, which I could go on about forever. But the big moments that I want you to think about are toward the end of the movie when he turns off his computer guidance system, right? Luke, what are you doing? Your guidance system. And he says, I'm okay. I got it. Because now he trusts in the Force, right? At the beginning, he was getting zapped in the behind by the drone thing on the Millennium Falcon because he couldn't do it. He didn't have that. He's grown. We're demonstrating growth. So goal, motivation, and conflict. Who is this story about? What are they trying to accomplish? Why is it important? Well, I skipped that part, but we kind of know the evil empire is, evil. And what's standing in their way? If you know how to answer those questions, you have the spine of a story. So I got to make sure I have those questions answered both. And then there's an internal arc and an external arc. So Luke is going to grow as a person and we're going to see him physically change things like being able to fight with the lightsaber and stuff. Does that make sense? Yeah, kind of. How about anybody know the Hunger Games? You guys know the Hunger Games? Yes, some. Well enough. So who's our main character? Please, somebody shout it out. Katniss Everdeen, yeah, I see my movie people are here. And what is Katniss's goal for the bulk of what is she trying to do? Stay alive. And specifically, what would staying alive do? Win the Hunger Games, right? Staying alive, when you are alive at the end of the Hunger Games, you're the winner, right? Why does it matter other than the fact that we all want to be alive? Why does it matter? Is there someone depending on her? Her sister, right? Because her mother has kind of been useless after her father passed away, right? The mom, I think they kind of imply that she sunk into a heavy depression and couldn't really take care of her family. So Katniss has been doing it. And if Katniss isn't there, she's worried about Prim and whether Prim is going to survive. Okay, so what's our conflict? Why can't she just win the Hunger Games? What's the issue? It's a competition to the death. There's other competitors, other kids. And on a larger issue, though, District 12 is one of the poor districts, right? And this whole thing is set up for her to fail because the system is working against her. And who represents the system? President Snow. I heard it. Yes. So do you see how all those factors kind of fit together? So when you have those questions, you have the story, right? That's sort of what I'm looking for when I'm developing an idea is, can I answer these questions? Okay. Once I have my draft, I usually send it to a critique partner. She'll give me feedback. I send it to my agent, if there's time to get her feedback. And then I turn it in and hope for the best. And then I get an edit letter with 15 pages of, it's great. Here's what we need you to do differently. And then I cry and I put it aside for a week. And then I go back to it and go, okay, you're kind of right. And then I gradually make the revisions. And I really will. The other thing I want to clear up really quickly is it is not true that a publisher can make you change something. In the contract, you absolutely have final say. However, if you are the person who says, no, I want my book to be 497 chapters long and I refuse to cut any of those out, how likely do you think they are to want to work with you again? So you're really balancing being an author that is a cooperative partner in this process and also being an advocate for your vision. And usually you can find a way to do both, but it is sometimes a balancing act. Okay, yeah. That's a great question. I don't actually know.
Can you repeat the question?
Does the length of the
Realize-
book have anything to do with commercial success?
Fantastic. Length of the book matters in one way that I know for sure, which is that over, I think, 150,000 words. In publishing, they don't care about page numbers. They go by words. So 150,000 words is 600 pages. After you go beyond that length, it costs more to print it, which means you have to sell more to be able to make up those costs. So I think they really try hard, even the fantasy novels, which tend to be kind of door stoppers, they try to keep them under that limit. I think that people's idea of word count and how thick a book is in terms of success sort of went out the window when Harry Potter sold hand over fist to little kids who are reading 400-page books. 600 page books. So I don't think so. It's got to be the story and the marketing behind it. I don't know for sure though.
I think we should take questions from the audience and then we have some from Zoom.
Oh, sure.
And so why don't we do that? But thank you for doing your presentation.
Oh, sure. I told you I was an informal speaker. I really am.
Hold on, here we are. Three-parter. Elon Musk named Falcon 9 after the Millennium Falcon. He was inspired by that. Two-parter. Who were some of your favorite authors as a girl growing up? And I'm still stumbling about writing the lousy first draft.
Yeah.
I mean, you still have your vision, you still have your investment, and you're somehow able to let go of it.
Well,
I
you're
can't
not
imagine. So please tell us about that.
So, okay. So inspiration, this is like when people ask me who my favorite writer is, I'm like, well, it changes hourly, daily, depending on what I'm reading. In terms of classics, I was an English major who avoided all classics as much as possible. Jane Austen until I got into a Jane Austen class. And now I am a devoted Austenite. Which is why I was asking Jill where she was from, because I love England and I haven't visited there yet. But Suzanne Collins, who wrote Hunger Games, that was just phenomenal in the day. I remember I hate flying. Flying makes me really nervous. I was flying to a book event at the time. I was reading Hunger Games and I didn't want the flight to end because I was that captivated by the story. There are other people who do dialogue phenomenally well. I love humor. I hope that's obvious. And so if you have a sense of humor in your story, no matter what genre it is, I'm in it, because if you can make me laugh, I'm going to buy your book. So the crappy first draft, you're not letting go of your vision. You're letting go of perfection. So what you're doing is you're writing down to the best of your ability and understanding that in this draft alone, it is not going to necessarily live up to the standard in your head. And you're going to plan. So Anne Lamott talks about the write it down draft, the fix it up draft, and the check it out draft. So you have multiple drafts. First one, get it down. Because if you don't get it down, if you're holding on to it until it's perfect, you're never going to write it. So write it, make a mess of it, learn something, because you may discover a character or a thought that you weren't going to get to if you were trying for perfection. The fix it up draft is where you're going through and trying to make sure the mechanics of the story actually work, whether the character is growing, there's some famous story about what is it? Is it Raymond? It's a famous mystery writer who killed off a butler, like at the beginning chapter, and then forgot about it by the end. And he was with a fan and someone said, well, who killed the butler? And he was like, oh, I forgot about him. So you want to avoid that as much as possible. And then your last one, to check it out, she says it's like a dental check where they go in and they check your teeth to make sure everything's okay. That's what you're doing in that last draft. So what it is the idea that you have to let go of getting it perfect out of the gate. It's not that it's not going to live up to your vision eventually. It's that you have to let go of that, because otherwise you're not going to get anything. You're just, at least for me, every writer's different. I'm still working on it. Believe me, I'm a work in progress.
Do you have to limit the number of characters that you include in order to not get into the weeds of doing background on too many characters to make the story meet the mission of what you're trying to tell in the story?
That's a great question. And I tend to have one main character. When I was writing romance and when I was writing young adult, I had two main characters. I would alternate chapters, first person, which that's very hard to do. And I definitely should not have done that. But I'm not one of those cast of characters people, because I like books to imitate reality as much as possible, which means I'm in one person's head, because I don't really know what anybody else is thinking. So for me, it's less about that scope. I mean, that is certainly a concern. I have read books where there have been multiple characters. I'm like, the example that I always think of is people talk about reading George R.R. Martin, and then there's, a chapter from this person. You're like, I don't care. I want to know about Jon Snow. So they're going to skip chapters to get back to Jon Snow's So it is a danger, but I think it kind of depends on the scope of the world and the story you're trying to tell.
Hold on.
Just what comment in reading, often I find myself having to go back to find who these characters are. And there's one book I read recently that has a cast of characters kind of in the front. So you can just go back to the front and find out, oh, that's Joe's wife. Oh, that's Charlie's brother.
Uh-huh.
You know, and I find that very, very helpful, as opposed to have to go back and, oh, there it is. You know, sometimes take half hour to find the guy. So that's just a comment.
No, that's true. And there are several, like, especially if you're dealing with a large cast of characters, it's helpful. Sometimes people also include family trees, so you can see who's connected to who and how and over how many years, which is really helpful.
I'm a big reader. I'm a very poor writer. I couldn't even write a good paragraph. But when you mentioned about getting published and all of that, I have found that when I go with my wife to Costco and they don't have shelves, they have a table, and you find on the table what are the best sellers, maybe not the best books. And if Baldacci comes out with a new book,
Sure.
Grisham comes out with a new book, this Silva comes out, those guys are out all the time, unless there's a very famous person's biography. So it seems to me, from a business standpoint, that there is a certain fraternity
Oh,
that
100%.
gets it. And I'll tell you, like I say, I'm a reader, and friends of mine say, read this book or read that book. And a couple of months ago, somebody recommended I read a Jodi Picoult.
Okay. That's very far afield from the other ones you mentioned, but yes.
Yeah. So I'll tell you, I read that book.
Uh-huh.
And I'll tell you what I thought. I thought it was a commercial mess. And I think it was a book where her publisher said to her, Jodi, we need another book. And she wrote this thing. It was about the pandemic and some gal marooned on some island. And, I mean, it was wild, but it was published, and it was, I guess, a bestseller. That's the only comment that I have to make. But I'm going to tell you one other story that you might be interested in. I was in sales for over 50 years. I really traveled. It's gone. So anyway, many years ago, I'm in my motel. I'm shaving and I'm watching the Today Show.
Uh-huh.
And at that time, Jane Pauley was still on the show. And she interviewed John Grisham. And the first or second sentence, she said to him, Mr. Grisham, I read some of the reviews and they really weren't too good. And he sat there with his sport coat, jeans, and work boots, crossed his legs, and he said, let me tell you something. These people who review books, they've never, ever been on the New York Times bestseller list. And that's all they hope for. So I'm not going to worry about it. That's the last thing I have to say.
We have some Zoom questions we really need to get to. Can we do that now, Ronnie?
Sure, go ahead.
Well, first I have a comment from Beth Berman. Who said,
Beth!
I wish I could see you. So, hi, Stacey from Beth.
Hi, Beth, if you can hear me. I worked with Beth when I worked at Allstate. I worked as a copywriter at Allstate.
That's terrific. Okay, some of the questions. I have a question. Who do you go to for criticism? Who do you trust to let you know if you're on the right track?
Usually what I try to do is I have a critique partner, someone I've worked with for a number of years. She's another writer. We both write similar things. Linnea Sinclair is her name. She writes science fiction for Bantam Random House. She was in an anthology once with George R.R. Martin, which I was like, you have George R.R. Martin's email? She's like, yes, and I'm not giving it to you. And she's fabulous because she writes, but writes in a very different way than I do. So when I am missing something, she's very good at being like, you're missing this part of it. And I have a blind spot there and didn't see it. Also, I rely on my sister. But basically, if you're interested in writing, find someone who reads the thing that you're trying to write. In other words, if you're writing a science fiction novel, please don't give it to your best friend who only reads romance, because the genre expectations are very different. So find someone who you trust, whose opinion you value. Also, when you're asking for feedback, be very clear about what you want. I'm concerned about chapter 23. I'm concerned about this character being sympathetic enough. If you hand it over and don't give them any feedback about what you're looking for, you're not likely to get the kind of content critique that you're looking for.
Karen Jacobson had a couple points. One, I think you've addressed. I've heard authors say the story was inside of me and it had to come out. Where do you get your inspiration for your storylines? And I think you covered that. Another question though from her, how do you inspire young people to put their phones down and write?
So here's the thing. One of the things I love about my school where I work is that they have put a great emphasis on reading for pleasure. So the kids have a reading time at the beginning of every English period they have for 10 minutes, and they're allowed to choose whatever they want. They can read a graphic novel, they can read a magazine, they can read any book they want. They're not necessarily required to read To Kill a Mockingbird or Of Mice and Men. They're reading what they want. And the thing is you want to build reading as a skill, as something that they're going to continue to enjoy. And the best way to do that is not to shove it down their throats. So one of the things that I love is that when you do that, I see kids every day reading books with their phones off next to their side. I see it every day. Kids actually prefer print because it's not, they're on their screens all the time, and this is away from them. I can tell you that as for fact, because my sales on the young adult side were always higher in print than in ebook. When I got to the adult side, then ebooks started skyrocketing because everybody likes to be able to adjust the font.
You may have addressed this one too. I think I heard part of it, but do you ever start writing one thing and then up writing something else? What influences that decision? I mean, the book has a kind of a life of its own, correct?
Yes. So there's a great quote, and I think it's from Terry Pratchett, who says basically the first draft of anything is you telling the story to yourself. And a lot of times I don't always know what I'm talking about until I get there. And I'm like, oh, this is what that story's about. I mean, I have the character and I have the idea, but sometimes I don't know, people, it's really funny. When I wrote the book, The Ghost and the Goth up there, it's about a girl. It's humor. It's definitely humor. She gets run over by a bus and she becomes a ghost and she's stuck and she's the popular girl and she's so mad because nobody can see her. And except for the one weird kid who can actually see ghosts. In any case, I didn't realize that I was really talking about, the influence that we have on each other, on being kind, on that sort of thing, until I got to the end of the book. And then there are still people who read it and go, well, clearly she has a bone to pick with organized religion. And I'm like, well, my dad's a pastor, so. So sometimes you don't know what you're doing until you get through it. And even then, other people will have a different take on the themes.
Okay.
So I feel like it's not a static thing.
All right. One last question, a quick one. Do you do nonfiction? That's a yes or no question.
I do not. I also really quick want to just say, the person who asked about ideas, I read a lot of news stories, a lot of funky, weird news stories. There's a lot of weird stuff that happens. There was a news story not that long ago about the dye in blue M&Ms, that they were using that in experiments, in scientific experiments, to see if they could reverse paralysis in mice. And then whether that would be something that it would work in humans.
Okay.
And then, of course, my brain goes, all right, well, that would be cool, but you can't have anything in a story without conflict. So like, what if they did that, but then it turned to people blue? Like you could get use of your legs back, or you lose your whole body back, but you would be a permanent shade of M&M blue. Would you do that? And how would society change around like weird stuff?
Okay. Last question.
Yeah.
What you do, would it apply to film as well? And would any of your works apply to film?
I think so. I certainly am one of those people. Actually, when I talked about doing reading and learning things, I took screenwriting classes. I didn't take novel writing classes because in my head, it plays like a movie. So I certainly try it. Several of my books have been optioned. We've just never made it all the way to film yet. So yes, absolutely everything that I do, I hope translates to film. And I think that a lot of the advice that I follow is the same advice they give screenwriters.
Unless there's anything
With that, Stacey, thank you so much. Great presentation.
Great presentation.
Thank you.
And do stop by the gift shop on the way out.
Before I forget, I would be a very bad author and in big trouble. I need to tell you that my books are available pretty much everywhere, but certainly on Amazon, if that is your preferred choice. But Barnes & Noble, Barbara's Bookstore, I heard in Hawthorne has it. So please, if you're interested in anything, please go check it out. Write a review. Thank you.